I'll go ahead and do that, recording that there, Jordan. I'm Cynthia Wallace. I'm the executive director of Golden Eagle Audubon, and this is such an important topic, and I'm so happy to have Kaitlyn here again to present on this. And I'm super thrilled to have Jordan Bates here, who is going to be taking over in a second as our project lead for this critical topic. Our members have been asking for this topic to be kind of more in the forefront of our activities. And so here we are, we're in the midst of this, and it's super exciting. And I just want to welcome you and welcome Jordan Bates to our small but humble and awesome team. And yeah, enjoy the information and what we have in store coming up of how you can help. All right, thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Cynthia, for introducing me. For anyone who hasn't met me yet, my name is Jordan. I'm one of the field trip leaders with Golden Eagle Audubon, and also recently been appointed as our bird window collision project prevention lead, to avoid having a little bit of a mouthful for my title and for our project. To help make it easier to talk to people about saving birds. We've come up with a new name for it. It is Project Skyward. And I am so excited to be part of this initiative and to work on helping educate people in our community about saving birds, and how we can prevent window strikes, which is what Kaitlyn is here to talk to us about today. If anyone was not at Kaitlyn's past presentation a couple of years ago, she's the collisions program coordinator for the American Bird Conservancy. She's been working in window collisions for nearly 10 years now. She started out, I think, as an intern with the New York City Audubon, which is now the New York City Bird Alliance. So we are so lucky to have her here, and she's going to be focusing her talk tonight a little bit different than the past one and largely on residential applications. So this is information about exactly like what you can do at your home to help save birds. I just want to remind everybody that the workshop will be recorded and available on our YouTube page. After the presentation's over, I'll send out a link to that. So if you want to, please make sure that our video and audio is turned off to kind of minimize distractions. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post those to the chat, and I'll make sure that Kaitlyn gets them at the end of our talk. All right, Kaitlyn, it's up to you. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Thank y'all for having me. Let me just get my screen shared here. Everyone should be able to see that now. If you can't, please speak up. Thank you so much for having me back again. I am going to go through some information that's background and very similar, but hopefully some new information as well. And ABC has gotten a rebrand, brand refresh since the last time I was here. So at least my PowerPoint is much more attractive this time. So there's that. I would love it if everyone or anyone who wants to could take a moment and just drop in the chat what your first experience with window collisions, was it at your house? Was it as an adult? Was it during childhood? I'm just curious, what y'all's experiences with window collisions have been thus far. And while you're doing that, I'll just talk a little bit about what I do here at American Bird Conservancy. So we have a 4-person collisions team. We are solely focused on window collisions. It's all we do. We do a lot of public education. We do resource development. We train architects. We help with building design and retrofit consulting. So we work with building owners and managers and contractors. We have a lot of policy initiatives at the federal, state, and local level. And we also work extensively in materials testing and development, because you can't have bird-friendly glass unless bird-friendly glass exists as an option. So So today, I'm going to go over a little bit about collision science and the principles of collision prevention, and then really focus on preventing collisions at home and going through the products that are currently available, and then, of course, how we can scale up to have whole bird-friendly communities. So let's start a little bit on the science of window collisions. And just to make sure we're on the same page, I realize I use the word collision just very colloquially, and I don't always define this word. But really what I mean when I say collision is bird window collision, bird building collision, or glass collisions. Typically when birds are colliding with buildings, it is with the glass specifically. And these are high-speed collisions that result in death or injury to the bird. There are also territorial collisions. And this is when a bird is being aggressive and attacking its reflection in a window. People often notice this, or at least on the East Coast, with cardinals. I guess I'm in Colorado. We'd be really excited maybe to have a cardinal attacking its reflection in our yards, but it is the most common experience. There was also a pileated woodpecker that was damaging car mirrors on the East Coast in a pretty funny story. And for these types of collisions, you have to entirely black out the reflection of the window until the bird moves on. So a lot of the prevention that I'm going to talk about for bird glass collisions or bird building collisions would actually not work for these territorial collisions. So if you do have those, block out the reflection on the exterior of the window until that bird moves on. So I usually ask people to raise their hand if I'm in person and say, have you experienced a bird window collision before? And typically, almost everyone in the audience, I would say on average, I get 80 to 90% of an audience raising their hand. And one of the reasons I asked you what your experience is because a lot of people also have a really vivid memory of their first experience with a window collision. So this was my introduction to window collisions. This is the kitchen table of my childhood home. You can see that picture is like definitely from the 90s. And I would sit in front of that picture window and do homework or eat breakfast, and one time I heard this huge loud bang, and a bird had just hit the window. And I ran outside and I looked at it, and it was a cardinal. This is in Maryland, and I picked it up and the bird died in front of me. And I was told my stepmom about it. She's like, oh yeah, that happens sometimes. Like she's like, usually they get up and fly off and they're fine, but somehow they don't make it. The cardinals especially, they're just stupid. And that was sort of how I thought about window collisions for many, many years after that. It was only when I started working, I was in graduate school in New York City. I became an intern at New York City Audubon when I started learning about window collisions. And I definitely had a talk with my stepmom about window collisions and how it's not normal and it's not because the birds aren't stupid. But yeah, I have a very vivid memory of that. So, let's see, what does collisions do to birds? Up to 1 billion birds die from collisions in the US alone. This was a stat that comes from a paper that was published by Dr. Scott Loss at the Smithsonian in 2014. The data used for this study, so this is more than 10 years old, was primarily from carcass surveys. This is from volunteers walking around and picking up carcasses and injured birds off of sidewalks. Many carcasses are actually taken by predators before being found, so volunteers are only finding a fraction of the number of carcasses that are actually there to be found earlier in the day. Some studies have shown as low as 23 to 24% recovery rate in some places, up to 80 to 90%. It really depends on the context. And of course, this study did not include injured birds that were taken to rehab. Recent studies have shown that in many cases, less than 10% of birds that hit windows actually leave evidence. And there are two studies by Dr. Brendan Samuels and Dr. Daniel Clem. Brendan's study was using video cameras to consistently monitor a backyard and the glass at a backyard. And Dr. Klem's study involved an undergraduate sitting and watching window panes that were hung in a natural area. And they both found that less than 10% of the birds that hit those windows leave evidence. They hit the window and they fly off immediately after hitting that window, or they're stunned for a moment and fly off. So those birds would have never been found by volunteers either. And so that led us to wonder what happens to birds that don't die immediately. And I say us, I really mean myself, and I started this paper when I was working at New York City Audubon, and so it was the team at New York City Audubon along with some folks from universities, from Fordham University and Stony Brook University that I was working with as well. And we finally published our paper. So this paper was years in the works, but we finally got it out about rehabilitation outcomes for collision victims, because we really wanted to get at what happens to the birds that don't die immediately. And so what we did was examine 3,100 rehabber records of window collisions from 6 states in the Northeast. We found a couple of things. One is that collisions are sort of gradually lethal. So the longer these birds are kept in care, so after a day, many of them would die. Within 2 days, many of them would die. So a lot of these birds were not dying immediately, but even with treatment, they were dying later. Most of them had head trauma and concussions, brain bleeding, that sort of stuff. And we also found that mass was correlated with release rate. So a lot of the bigger birds were more likely to be released than the smaller birds. But the main outcome of our study, our main finding, is that ultimately 60% of all the patients died in care. So 60% of the birds, all the birds that were taken to rehabbers, these birds are getting the best standard of care, still didn't make it. And so from those outcomes, what we can surmise is that over 1 billion birds die each year from collisions, because Dr. Loss's paper didn't include injured birds at all. So it didn't include any of the birds that were picked up but taken to rehabbers. Those birds were presumed to have survived, but really 60% of them likely didn't make it. Of course, that's an average, but that's what the study is. There are also still unknown outcomes for birds that survive and are not taken into care. So we know that birds that are injured but able to be picked up by volunteers are probably a little more injured than birds that fly away immediately. But those birds that are picked up, they get really good care. They get fluids, they get anti-inflammatories, which are really important for concussions. So it's likely that some proportion of the birds that fly away, and possibly a significant portion, do not make it. And this number of birds that die from collisions could be really, really significant. You know, if we're only seeing 10% of the birds that collide and a significant portion of the ones that fly away immediately are dying, that could potentially be huge numbers of birds dying every year. And of course, there's still possible indirect effects on survivors. And what I mean by that is birds that do fly away and they do survive long term could also be affected. Their ability to migrate could be affected. Their reproduction rate could potentially be affected, their ability to find a mate and reproduce. And so while the injured bird may be okay and survive, this could potentially have a long-term effect on the population of birds if many of a certain species are hitting windows. And so our main takeaway for this is really, we can't rehab our way out of this issue. We can't just treat birds who have hit windows and think that we are fixing this. Prevention is so, so key. And I hear this a lot. And one of the reasons this is important to me is so many people, including people I love and hold near and dear to my heart, have said to me, yeah, birds hit my window, but they're fine, they're stunned and they fly away and they're okay, so I'm not worried about it. And I just really want to emphasize to folks that that bird that hit your window and flew away is very likely not okay. So prevention is key. So which buildings are the worst? If I was to ask you which buildings are the worst, just think in your head, what would you say, the left or the right? Okay. It's a trick question because both of these buildings are very, very bad for birds. There tends to be this association between collisions and high-rise buildings, but in fact, 99% of collisions take place on homes and low-rise buildings up to 11 stories. And you can see the breakdown here. And so homes are really 44% of all collisions. And then the vast majority of the remaining collisions are happening at low-rise buildings, 1 to 11 stories. And when collisions do take place on high-rise buildings, they're occurring mostly at the lower to mid levels of the building. That's where the birds are most active. That's where they're seeking food and shelter. And this is the glass that reflects vegetation. And that's what causes most collisions. Some high rises, of course, can be bird killers, but because there are relatively few of them on the landscape, compared to mid rises and low rises in homes, they make up only a tiny portion of the total. But even at high rise buildings, most collisions are still occurring on those lower levels where the birds are most active. So here's another question. Which buildings are the worst? What windows are birds likely to hit? And most people think about glass curtain walls or big glass picture windows. And of course, those things can be really bad. But this is, that's my hand. That's a belted kingfisher that I found. I was actually sitting on a screened-in porch with my grandmother, and I heard this loud whack, like so loud. And I jumped. I had no idea what it was. And my grandmother goes, "Oh, that sounds like a bird hit a window." And I was like, all right, first of all, hold on to that thought. Why do you know that sounds so well? But I'm going to go try to find this bird. And try to imagine what kind of window you think this bird might have hit. This is the house. And that window that's right in the middle, that little square window above the garage door, the center garage door, that is the window that this bird hit. I found that bird right between. So that window was perfectly reflecting the sky, and that kingfisher saw it as an escape route and went straight into it. Unfortunately, this bird did not survive. So which species are most at risk? Almost every species out there has hit a window at some point. The majority of birds, however, are songbirds that are killed in collisions, warblers, sparrows, thrushes. A lot of the species that migrate at night, long distances between their breeding grounds and their wintering grounds. They're running the gamut of North America twice a year. And they migrate at night, which can be a source of some confusion. So the birds aren't, for the most part, in most cases, flying into tall buildings while migrating at night. There are instances where a combination of lights and weather and heavy migration can lead to these big bird mortality events at certain buildings. And those events get a lot of publicity, but these events don't make up the majority of collisions. Most birds are colliding with windows after they've stopped to rest when they're active in the early morning hours and throughout the day at their stopover habitat. And of course, one of the reasons we, see a lot of collisions during migration is in part because a lot of collisions happen during migration, but also a lot of people are looking for collisions during migration. When I worked at New York City Audubon, we timed our volunteer program for collision monitoring to spring and fall migration. But winter collisions occur very often at homes, especially those with feeders. There are certain species that are really susceptible to winter collisions. Grosbeaks are one of them. And in certain places, winter collisions can actually make up the majority of collisions. And interestingly, here in the Rockies, I suspected, so I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I suspected that winter collisions might be the number, like sort of the majority of collisions here, mainly because we just don't get a heavy migration like they do in other places. And I was talking with students at CSU, which is in town, and they did some monitoring, and in fact, they did find that the vast majority of collisions happen in winter. So we emphasize migration, and that's super important, but we also need to remember that collisions do happen year round. So why do birds hit glass? As I told my stepmom, they're not stupid. They don't see glass or recognize it as a solid barrier. And people think they can see glass, but we can't see glass either. That's kind of the point. It's clear. If we could see glass, there would be no need for signs like the sole purpose of this sticker is to prevent people from walking into the glass door. We use architectural cues to see where glass might be: a door handle, a sticker on the window, a door frame, a window frame, things like that. Birds don't speak architecture. And if you saw my presentation 2 years ago, you've seen this before. I always use it because I think it's really useful. Is if we look at this picture of trees, we don't know whether that's trees, or trees seen through glass, or trees reflected in glass. If we back out a little and give ourselves a little more context, we can start to use architectural cues to understand that glass must be involved. And then it isn't until we back out and we get the whole view that we can tell that this is trees reflected in a glass building. Birds just don't understand. They don't know what mullions are. They don't know what door handles are. And to sort of get this point across how we use context clues to detect glass, I'm going to show you a video of one of my favorite wholesome pranks ever. You can take all the architectural cues away and people will run into glass. And that's mean, but I'm sure a lot of us have done it or know someone who have done it. But you can also put those architectural cues into place and trick someone into thinking that glass is present, which is what's shown here. And I just think, first of all, I think this is a very nice prank, but I think it also really gets the point across that if you put a door handle, if you put signage hanging in midair on clear fishing line, you can trick someone into thinking glass is actually present. Yeah. So birds take things literally. On the left, you see trees reflected in glass. Birds think this is habitat and try to fly through it. On the right, you see trees behind glass. Birds think that this is habitat. It is, and they try to fly to it. In both cases, there is a glass barrier between them and the perceived habitat. Light also does exacerbate the issue. So light is a predictor of migratory bird stopover. So our really built up urban areas are very well lit, and birds are drawn in by light on migration. So birds are actually drawn into our urban areas because of the light, and then they're in closer proximity to not only glass, but lots of other issues: feral and free roaming cats. They might be attracted to places with a lack of adequate stopover habitat, so maybe a lack of adequate cover or a lack of food. So light is really drawing these birds into urban areas and suburban areas on migration. Beacon type lights can also attract and disorient migratory birds, like the 9/11 Memorial Tribute in Light. These beams shine straight up into the air and can attract birds to them from up to, I think, 5 kilometers away. And these birds start to really swirl and they get trapped in these lights, and they're constantly circling and getting exhausted and coming down closer and closer. Fortunately, New York City Bird Alliance does monitor these lights, and there is a protocol to turn the lights out when enough birds are, or when many birds are trapped, to allow them to continue on. And if you turn those lights off, the birds are pretty quickly able to reorient themselves and continue on to migration, on with their migration. And in certain cases, birds can be more likely to hit lit windows at night. It's not exactly clear what the driver of this is. Are these birds attracted near the windows? Is the light disorienting the birds and making them hit the windows? But there is cases. This was actually a study done at a big building in Chicago, and they found that lit windows had more collisions than unlit windows. Even when the collisions were not all happening at night, the collisions were also happening during the day. So, finding solutions. There are lots of, trying to think of what I was trying to get at with this slide. There's been a lot of work to figure out the solutions for window collisions. A lot of this work really, really hinges on the work of collision monitoring programs, which are often volunteer-led, volunteer-run. People have put thousands upon thousands of hours into this, and it's been invaluable in helping determine what works. There's also experimental field setups. A lot of bird vision research and modeling has gone into determining how to prevent collisions. There are flight tunnels. I'll talk briefly about ours. And of course, case studies where retrofits have been put in place and worked. And those published case studies are really critical. Especially that before and after monitoring data. So being able to have a volunteer monitoring program, monitoring a building while you're working to find a solution, and then after the solution is installed, it's just, we love to see it. It is amazing, and we need more of that. So all of these things have come together to inform the solutions that I will be sharing with you in just a few moments. The tunnel research is what has allowed us to really learn more about what makes a product bird friendly. So this is one of American Bird Conservancy's tunnels. This is located at Foreman's Branch Bird Observatory. There's also one at Powder Mill up in Pennsylvania. And these tunnels are both at banding stations, and a portion of the birds that are banded are then taken to make a little flight in our tunnel before they get released and carry on with their migration. And the tunnel research allows us to learn more about what makes a product bird friendly and put together essentially a group of rules. We call them prescriptive guidelines for materials that are essentially a set of rules that if a manufacturer follows, the resulting product will be effective in preventing collisions. And this includes materials, spacing, the color, the reflectivity of the glass, the coatings you can use. And so we are able to use our test tunnel in order to determine that. Let me see if my next slide is, yes, so we have these two tunnels at Foreman's Branch Bird Observatory and at Powder Mill, and the inside of the tunnel looks like this. So at one end, you can see the picture on the left. There's a video camera that records the flight, as well as a hole where the technician puts their hand in with the bird and releases the bird at that end. The tunnel is dark, and at the far end, there are two glass panels, one with the product being tested and one that's a clear control. In front of that is a net. The bird hits the net. It does not hit the glass, so the birds are not injured during this protocol. And we have mirrors reflecting natural light onto the glass. And because birds are naturally attracted to light, they see this as a possible escape route. They fly down the tunnel and they choose which direction they think is the best escape route. And if you've got, say, a piece of glass on one side that has a bunch of dots and a complicated pattern on it, the birds might see that and decide they're going to go through the clear control where they see just nothing between them and an escape. And of course, the background is sort of a complex, just sort of blue and white neutral background, which you could think, you know, it's not supposed to resemble the sky, but sort of looks like a sky, like an option for escape. And so the more times we fly 80 birds per sample, and the more birds fly away from the tested pattern to the control, they're avoiding the pattern we're testing, the better we think that pattern works at deterring birds, and the better that product will likely work in deterring collisions when installed on a building. And so we use the percentage of birds that fly to the product to assign the glass an index, which we call a threat factor. So for example, if 5% of the birds fly toward the product and 95% of the birds fly away from it, it would get a threat factor of 5. And the lower the threat factor, the better we think a product will work. Of course, a threat factor of 5 doesn't guarantee that only 5% of wild birds are going to collide with this in a real life installation. There's not necessarily a very direct relationship because there are so many environmental factors that will affect collisions in the real world. But this index gives us a good idea of what is likely going to be bird friendly and prevent collisions. All right. So now I'm going to get into the principles of collision prevention. How to make glass bird friendly. We say a lot and I say this a lot, we want to make glass visible to birds. Make glass visible to birds. This is going to prevent collisions. That's not actually technically accurate. What we want to do is put markers on the glass that birds see and avoid. The birds still don't know that glass is present, but they know the markers are a solid barrier, and they know they can't fly into those, and so they will avoid the glass entirely because it's covered with markings that they know are solid. We're sort of mimicking a really complex environment. So if a bird is flying in open sky, it's probably flying along, it's paying attention to predators on either side of it. It's not really focusing on what's in front of it, but as a bird enters a complex environment, it's really looking at that environment, those twigs, those branches, how close are these things? It's paying attention, it's seeing where it can fit based on its body size. And we're mimicking that kind of environment. We're making these birds pay attention to these markings. We want them to say, hey, I can't fit there, and I'm gonna fly away from it. And the important part is what makes these elements of a pattern visible to birds. So we're not making the glass visible. That's just sort of a shorthand way of saying we put visible markers on the glass that birds see and avoid. And so they avoid the glass entirely, and we can prevent that collision from happening. This is sort of my nightmare scenario, this invisible house in Joshua Tree. But by using the rules that I'm going to share with you to make the markers, to put markers on a building, make them visible, we could make even this building visible to birds. We could prevent collisions even at a building like this. And it looks something like this. This is a product called Feather Friendly, I believe. So by adding something like this, even to the mirrored glass box in the first picture, we can make it bird friendly. Like I said, bird vision, eye placement, their eyes on the side of their heads, they're not focused on what's in front of them the way we are. They see color a little differently than us. A lot of birds see into the UV spectrum. The one way our vision is better than birds is contrast sensitivity. So if you look at that contrast image, the gray and black stripes, and you go from the left to the right, as you move, eventually those stripes kind of fade together and just form like a gray blob. It all looks like one color probably to you at a certain point. You can probably get pretty far to the right before it merges together. Birds will not be able to see the contrast between those lines as far over as you can. So their contrast sensitivity is lower than people. And then this is what I said already. I got ahead of myself. Birds are navigating open skies versus cluttered pathways where they're more focused on what's in front of them. They're determining where they can fit, what their body size and wingspan will allow them to do. So how can we make elements in a pattern visible to birds? We're going to focus on 4 things: spacing, color, size, location. And these are the rules. First, we're going to focus on spacing, then color, then size, then location. I hit those animations at the wrong time. Sorry, everyone. Let's start with spacing. We have landed on what we call the 2x2 rule for dots and 2 inches for lines. The 2x2 rule means that between the elements in the pattern, there should be no more than 2 inches of space between elements in the vertical direction and no more than 2 inches of space between elements in the horizontal direction. So vertically and horizontally, no more than 2 inches between whatever elements: stripes, lines, dots, hearts, feathers, bird pictures, cats, whatever you want. The spacing needs to be 2 by 2 inches. You may have heard before we use the 2 by 4 inch rule. The 2 by 4 inch rule works fairly well in most cases for most birds. It still prevents us a good number of collisions. However, the smallest of our birds, the hummingbirds, the kinglets, they are so tiny that sometimes they will try to fit between a 4-inch horizontal spacing. And so if you take it down to 2 by 2 inches, you can prevent collisions with even the smallest birds. And if you prevent collisions from the smallest birds, it's going to work well for the larger birds too. So 2 by 2 for spacing. Next up is color. High contrast. Birds have low contrast sensitivity. If you put a gray stripe on a grayish glass, you're likely not going to prevent collisions that way because the birds can't tell the difference between the stripe and the glass, so they don't see the pattern. We recommend black or white. You can see these are kind of varying colored stripes on glass on the background that's this house. And in some cases, the white stands out. In some cases, the black stands out. The gray kind of stands out okay too. But if you really want the best level of prevention, I recommend going for black or white. And it might be worthwhile to see what your window is reflecting and whether white will stand out better or black will stand out better. If you put white dots on something that's reflecting sky, black dots might actually work a little better, but if you've got this dark complex forest background, then white might work a little better. So it's important to take into context and try to maximize your contrast. Size. Dots need to be a minimum of 1/8 of an inch wide. And lines need to be a minimum of 1/8 of an inch wide, and dots need to be 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And if you're going for sort of an amorphous blob or a heart or whatever you want, just try to follow about 1/4 inch in size for any elements of your pattern. And so if you look at these lines on 2 different backgrounds, so this background has kind of the complex tree background and the blue sky background, and the lines vary in width from left to right and vary in opacity from 25% opaque to 100% opaque. And the lines are more visible on the plain background, wide lines are more visible than the narrow lines, and of course the opaque lines are more visible than the transparent lines. And so this is how sort of size and color and transparency all play together when you're looking at prevention. And then location. All of collision prevention options must be on the exterior of the glass. And that's because in most cases, the issue is with the reflection in the glass. So on both the left and the right, there are alternating stripes, black stripes, white stripes, and they alternate inside the window and on the outside of the window. And when that reflection is very strong on the exterior of the glass, it completely obscures anything that is placed on the interior of the glass. I will say there are a couple places where I've seen this work, an interior installation work, but they're really specific contexts where there's really no reflection. It's very much a fly-through transparent situation on a very non-reflective monolithic pane of glass, and then a black dot actually on the inside will work quite well. But most cases, especially at homes, we're really looking at an exterior only. The collision prevention rules. 2 by 2 spacing, 1/8 inch lines, 1/4 inch dots, high contrast, exterior of the glass. If you can come up with some really cool, new, interesting and never before seen collision prevention that follows these rules, do it and then share it with us and we will advertise it for you. Because if you follow these rules, you will be able to prevent collisions. So now I'm going to run through the practical solutions for collision prevention, the things you can do at home. Don't worry about writing these things down. One, as Jordan said, this is going to be recorded, but we also have our website, our Prevent Home Collisions website that goes over the rules and also has direct links to the products that I am listing here. So you will be able to find them. I recommend starting by fixing any windows where you've heard or seen a bird hit. Windows near feeders and fruit trees, windows with reflected vegetation. There are tons of options and you don't necessarily need to fix every single window at the same time. You can kind of triage. It's important to know what's not going to work. Of course, single hawk decals are not going to work because the birds will see the silhouette as something they can't fly to. But as pictured, you can see in this door, they very easily will fly above around, underneath. So they'll avoid the decal, but they're not going to avoid the entire glass window because the spacing isn't correct. It's also way bigger than it needs to be. If you have a hawk decal already and you're like, shoot, I really wanted to put that up, now I have to buy something new, you can just cut it up into little pieces, little 1/4-inch pieces, and spread it out over your whole window, and that will work. Moving bird feeders, we don't recommend. There is no safe distance from a window for bird feeders, and blinds often will not work. In fact, in some cases, closing your blinds will actually intensify the reflection on the outside of the window and make it worse. So what can you use? Insect screens. Insect screens work great as they are on the exterior of your window. You can see in this picture, they really cut the reflection. And if for some reason, a bird does hit your screen, it does provide a little bit bounce. It kind of reduces the force of that impact, but you'll be very unlikely to have bird collisions at any windows where you have exterior insect screens. Tempera paint, you can freehand tempera paint designs on your windows. This is a great option, especially if you're like, oh shoot, I need to fix my windows, but I don't have time to do research, or my package isn't going to come for a week. You can just take tempera paint. It's available at craft stores, both in brushes and in like pen form, and just draw the pattern on your windows. It'll stay for quite a while. I know people who do murals and then they wash them off and change them out every quarter or so. You can also buy stencil, like paint rollers and stencils. So if this is what I would need to do, I'm not a great artist. So you can just buy the stencil as long as the spacing is right and just put that right on your window. This is a really cool, this picture is a little bit pixelated, but you can see there's some really neat stenciled windows there. Acopian bird savers are a great option. They are essentially parachute cords that hang off in front of your windows. They're spaced 4 inches apart. We have seen that the 4-inch spacing on the Acopian bird savers is effective even for small birds, possibly because they move or because they're actually sitting off the window. So these are okay at the 4-inch spacing. And Acopian bird savers, you can buy this product, but they also have instructions for making DIY Acopian bird savers on their website. Bird crash preventers, this is essentially fishing line strung in front of windows at 2-inch spacing. This does seem to work despite it appearing to be fairly invisible. I don't always recommend this one because I don't necessarily want to put more fishing line out into the world. These will break down in sunlight eventually and break, but as long as you're disposing of it properly, it shouldn't be a problem. And if one breaks, get it replaced right away so no birds get tangled in it. But this is also an option. Decals can work. So on the right or on the left, you might have heard of window alert decals. These are fairly large decals, and in order to use them appropriately, they do need to be spaced quite close. And that means that your view is going to be quite obscured. Again, if I was going to use these, I would cut them up into smaller pieces and spread them out across the window. So just make sure if you're buying pre-made decals, you're using them in the right spacing. Tape will work. So ABC makes a product called, Feather Friendly makes a product, our product ABC Bird Tape, and you can buy that by the roll and put that on your windows. You can make creative designs, but you can also use just about any tape that you can find. Here is some more pictures of tape. I will say that both of these pictures, I believe, are at the 4-inch spacing, not the 2-inch spacing, but they are quite large lines, but I would try to put them a little bit closer together. Those are fairly old pictures. This is a picture from a Cornell Feeder Watch participant. She was having a lot of collisions at those beautiful windows with those beautiful feeders and all those goldfinches. And she just bought chart tape and she put that on her windows. And she said, the view out, it doesn't bother her. She can still watch her birds. She can still photograph her birds. And she's really happy with this solution. Feather Friendly is a product, it's essentially a vinyl dot, I believe. So this product goes on and you can do DIY. It comes in single tape strips or 6-inch tape strips, I believe. So like a couple rows of dots at a time. And you put it on like a film, but then you peel off the backing and only the dot is left behind. So this is Feather Friendly. Again, it really doesn't mess up your view. I have Feather Friendly on my front picture window, and it took my husband several weeks before he realized that I had actually installed it. And it lasts for quite a long time. This does not need to be changed. I believe Feather Friendly says this lasts about 10 years. Kaleidoscape is an option. Kaleidoscape White is sort of, you can see through it from the outside. Your view is like a little bit cloudier, but like this works really well. And then from the outside looking in, this is a full white. This works really well in solutions where you actually don't, there's like a security need for windows to be covered. This actually is one of the only products that will work for those territorial collisions as well, because it completely blocks out the reflection. Kaleidoscape also has a white dot product that is like the Feather Friendly product as well, I believe. Feather Friendly has commercial options. So Feather Friendly can be used on commercial buildings. If you're working with a building and you want to get them to put something in place, this works great. Bird Divert is a DIY UV solution. So these are alternating UV reflecting and absorbing dots that kind of looks almost like water droplets on your window. So it's pretty invisible, but you can still kind of see it. I will say that I do have a disclaimer for UV. It can be a great option, but not all birds can see UV. So if you've got a lot of doves and hawks that you're worried about, they cannot see UV. This product will not work for them. And not all locations are appropriate for UV solutions. So in order to reflect or absorb UV light, the product has to receive UV light. So if a product is in deep, deep shade, if it's under a deep overhang, it's not getting a lot of light, it's not going to be as effective. So I say, you know, these bright sun, one of the places this works great is Zion National Park. So you can imagine they get a ton of sun. It works great for them. I would not recommend it for some deep shade forest, for example. Solex is a full film. They have stripes and various patterns. They also now have a UV film, so it both reduces the solar gain of the window and has a bird-friendly pattern on it, which is really cool. I need to get some more pictures of that one. That's pretty new. Netting is an option. I will say that if the netting, you've got to check it regularly. If it gets loose, birds can get trapped in it or behind it or tangled in it. So it just requires a certain level of vigilance if you're going to use netting. Solar shades are great. Exterior shades, anything that is covering your windows on the exterior, external solar blinds, for example, all of those reduce the exposure of glass. The birds aren't exposed to the glass, they don't see the glass, and these things can all be super effective while also providing privacy and reducing the solar gain inside. And finally, lights out. Lights out is great. You should always use it in conjunction with bird-friendly glass or retrofits, not instead of. And Dark Sky International is a great resource for all things lights out, having a curfew, so turning lights off during nighttime hours, shielding fixtures, preventing light trespass, so having light only where it needs to be, using motion sensors. All of these things are very beneficial, but they won't necessarily directly prevent collisions. Again, abcbirds.org, sorry about the website, /solutions/prevent home collisions. You can find all of these products there. And I actually think this is pretty similar to what I did 2 years ago, so I'll roll through it pretty quickly. Building bird-friendly communities, obviously getting involved in local efforts. So I don't want to speak to Project Skyward, which is such a cool name. I don't know much about it, but I'm sure Jordan can explain everything and would love to have you involved if you're already not. I also just found out like 2 days ago that Boise State University has a window collision program. This is their iNaturalist page. I checked that out today, and they're documenting collisions at Boise State. And I believe Jordan also knows these folks and can provide more information if you're interested. You can always report collisions no matter where you are using iNaturalist or dBird or the Global Bird Collision Mapper. These are really great. If you just find a bird somewhere, if you find a bird at your house, it's great for documenting collisions that would otherwise go unreported. And it's possible, Jordan, maybe you want folks to use a certain reporting platform, so you can speak to that more than I can. You can advocate for retrofits. This can be really hard, building a coalition, monitoring, educating people, being patient and persistent is key. But a great success story recently is McCormick Place in Chicago. The bird collision monitors, Chicago Bird Collision Monitors, and the field museum there, their staff were monitoring this building for decades, documenting collisions for years and years and years. And a major collision event happened there where I think over 1,000 birds died in a single night. And that got a ton of media attention. And finally, they were able to get McCormick Place to get actually feather friendly installed. And this is just one of the most incredible success stories we've seen in the bird collision world. And there are tons of articles about this, news articles, if you'd like to read more. You can also advocate for new bird-friendly construction, like this is the Milwaukee Bucks Stadium. It took years and years for my colleague Brian to get them to, being persistent and getting them to finally build what is the first bird-friendly stadium. And now we've got other stadiums interested. So they really led the way. And finally, the best way to address collisions at a large scale is to pass bird-friendly policies. And this could be a college policy, a parks department policy, or a municipality policy. And 28 municipalities have passed mandatory bird-friendly ordinance so far. We have models that you can follow. We offer lots of resources on this. This is a list of all the places. I'd love to add Boise one day to this list. And so ABC is here to help with whatever project you're working on, be it, developing collision monitoring or trying to retrofit your home or trying to get a building near you retrofit. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And you can find all of these resources and more at birdsmartglass.org. So with that, thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kaitlyn. That was fantastic. I really hope that everybody has learned a lot about the myriad of options that you have available, whether it is from DIY paint or from installing commercial products like Feather Friendly and Bird Divert on your home. As part of Project Skyward, we will have some more information coming for you about local installers for people who aren't necessarily able to do installations like that of the professional products themselves. So we will be partnering with some local businesses. If you have a second story window or really tall windows, or it's just not something that you feel comfortable with, we're trying to make this as accessible as possible for everybody. We really appreciate everything that that you've done here for us tonight, Kaitlyn. And just to address one quick thing before we get into questions, we are still getting into refining our reporting system, but we do highly recommend using iNaturalist and the Global Bird Collision Mapper. Both of those are fantastic opportunities. iNaturalist, I think, is a little bit more user-friendly, and a lot of people may already be using that to identify and report different plants and birds that they find around town. So we did have a question earlier. Are there more bird strikes on windy days? How's weather impacting this?
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily say there are more bird strikes on windy days in terms of just higher wind speeds, period. But weather does have a big impact on collisions. There are 2 published studies on weather impacting collisions, one of which I worked on. And we find that cloud cover really affects collisions. So kind of the cloud ceiling and how low the clouds are during migration that potentially we don't know the driver, but it may have something to do with bringing birds lower during migration. Cloud cover and fog can seem to amplify the effects of lighting at night. So if you've ever seen a beam lit up on a clear day versus on a cloudy day, it's really different. And at the 9/11 Memorial Tribute and Light, we really see the bad nights, if you will, tend to be nights with cloud cover. And of course, wind does affect collisions depending on migration. So if there are tons of birds migrating and there's really strong winds out of the west and they push those birds off out of a city and away from the glass, you're going to see far fewer collisions that night. But if you've got a ton of wind or you had a really windy day and bad weather, and then all of a sudden it clears up and you've got a huge heavy migration push, you can see tons of collisions because there are so many birds moving through. So a lot of the wind kind of depends on, it affects collisions because it affects migration, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So I noticed that we had another question pop up in the chat that I guess would be probably more for me to answer. It was about if Boise has ordinances for bird-friendly windows for new housing and commercial buildings. At the moment, the Golden Eagle Audubon was able to collaborate with the city when they were rewriting ordinances. I believe they went into effect in December of 2023, where the new commercial buildings do have to use things like non-reflective glass, or opaque or translucent window film, or external screens on at least 90% of their windows. The new zoning code also restricts night lighting, which, as you know, Kaitlyn mentioned in the presentation, helps prevent the birds from becoming disoriented. So we are really looking forward to, you know, collaborating with the city on further lights out initiatives and other programs to, you know, increase restrictions on new buildings. But at this point, it only applies to new commercial developments. Does anybody else have any questions for us tonight? I'm just scrolling through the chat. It looks like maybe not. So I did want to extend an invitation to everyone here to a craft project that we are collaborating with BSU and the Intermountain Bird Observatory this weekend, called Project Anthropocene. It is a nationwide project meant to highlight the 10,836 birds that passed away in one evening at the Chicago's Lakeside building. We will be decorating bird bodies and sending with fabric scraps, and they're all handmade. Don't worry, no birds were harmed in the making of this project. But we will be sending those off to be part of a nationwide art exhibit. So we are still looking for volunteers. Or if you have a chance to pop by, I will be including my email address in the chat if you are interested in getting some details about popping in for that this weekend. It's going to be on Saturday at Sagebrush Collective. And for anyone who is interested in being a part of Project Skyward on a larger scale, I will be sending out a link to invite folks to be a part of that in our follow-up email. We are looking for volunteers to help out with tabled events and in-person presentations to help us spread the message, as well as a few events and other things that we'll have coming up this summer. So as you know, the mission of Project Skyward and Golden Eagle Audubon is about providing education to people, promoting conservation, and helping all of us learn how we can better save birds. So keep an eye out for that email coming from us. And I will also, again, be including a link to tonight's recording, to our YouTube channel. And thank you again, Kaitlyn. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming tonight. We really appreciate you.